Welcome to Creative Reuse with the Tenement Museum. The Tenement Museum tells the stories of immigrants, migrants, and refugees in the United States, and we are a history museum located in the Lower East Side of New York City. I'm Kat Lloyd from the museum's education department, and I'm really glad to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we will learn about creativity of kids in the past and make something new from materials in our homes. If you are tuning in to this event live, you can comment and ask us questions throughout the event by typing them into the comment section on the right-hand side of your YouTube live screen. We really want to hear from you. Now, let me introduce you to the Tenement Museum. This building is 97 Orchard Street. Many immigrants and their kids lived in this building in the past. Today, no one lives here, but many people visit now that it is the Tenement Museum. A tenement is an apartment building, and 22 families lived here at one time, each with their own apartment. There are 5 floors and 4 apartments on every floor. The building is in New York City, in a neighborhood called the Lower East Side. Let's look at a photo of the neighborhood in 1916, over 100 years ago. Here, we see a street corner in New York City in the year 1916. Take a minute to look at the photo. What do you notice? In this black and white photograph, I see many apartment buildings on both sides of the street. Some shop signs on the first floors of the buildings with some signs. I see a sign for a shoe company and a dentist's office. Some of the signs are in English and some signs are in Yiddish, a language spoken by the Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe who lived in the neighborhood. I see many people buying things in the street. It looks really crowded. I see what looks like fruit and vegetables for sale on big carts, like long tables that have large wheels with many spokes. Some people are wearing hats and some people are wearing long skirts, and they look busy, like they're moving fast. The sun is shining and it looks like it might be hot outside. In 1916, many people in the neighborhood were immigrants from different places in Europe. And I want to introduce you to a family who lived at 97 Orchard Street in 1916, the Confinos. This is the Confino family in a photo from 1911. In it, we see 14-year-old Victoria Confino standing all the way on the right, posed with her mother, Rachel, in the back, her father, Abraham, and 3 of her brothers. Victoria, she's the oldest of her siblings. Victoria and her family, they immigrated to New York City from a place called Castoria, which today is in Greece, and they moved to New York and lived in the apartment at 97 Orchard Street. Let's look at their home and see how they were being creative. This photo is the Confino family's kitchen. It's the first room you enter when you come through the front door of the apartment. Directly in front of us is a big black stove that would use coal to heat up for cooking food or heating the apartment. Behind the stove, we see a closed-up fireplace with a mantel or shelf on top. On the shelf, there are jars of food, beans, rice, lentils. There's a large white ceramic dish, perhaps for serving soup, and some pots and pans hanging off of the shelf. Now, above the stove, we see a line with clothes and some cloths for washing dishes hanging to dry above the stove. The kitchen would smell a little like coal smoke from the stove and would also smell like coffee and cinnamon, a common spice for Victoria's family. There are more shelves to the right of the stove with canned food and sets of dishes. The apartment was home to 10 people: Victoria, her parents, 5 of her siblings, and 2 cousins. During the day, everyone would be busy. Victoria's father would be at work. He owned a factory where people would make aprons. They would sew on sewing machines to make covers that people would wear to keep their clothes clean while they cooked. Victoria's siblings, they went to school, and Victoria and her mother worked to cook for the family and take care of the younger kids and the apartment. In the home, they spoke their language, Ladino, which sounds like Spanish, and at school, the kids would speak English. Now, this room was the kitchen where Victoria and her mother cooked meals for the family, but it was also Victoria's bedroom. She was the only girl in the family, and the family had to be creative to make space for everyone to sleep. Let's see the other side of the kitchen. In this photograph, we see the family's blue wash tub directly in front of us, with another laundry line hanging above it. On this laundry line, we see a blue shirt with a white collar and a couple of other cloths for perhaps washing the dishes that we see in the wash tub. Behind the kitchen, through the door to the right, we can see another room. This is Victoria's parents' bedroom. Take a moment to look at the two pieces of colorful patterned fabric hanging from the small window above the tub and in the doorway. The family used fabric they already had to make curtains for the doorways and for the window. This was one way that they used something that they found to make something new. So let's look at another example of something they made in another room of the apartment. Now, here is the Confino family's living room, or parlor, they might have called it. Take a moment to look closely at the details in this photograph. Again, see what you notice. What objects are there? What do we think they're used for? Now, this room is the biggest room in the apartment. And if you'll remember, we saw the kitchen, the parents' bedroom, and this room. That's the whole apartment. The apartment that the Confino family lived in, it had 3 rooms, and it was about 325 square feet, which is about the same size as a New York City subway car, if you've ever been in one of those. Now, in this room, the biggest room in the apartment, we see 2 big windows. There's a lot of light coming from the windows. Those look out onto the rear yard of 97 Orchard Street. On the walls of this room is decorative striped wallpaper, and there are a few framed photographs hanging on the walls. There's one twin bed on the right side of the room covered in a yellow blanket, and wooden chairs placed along the sides of the room. The bed and the chairs are places for Victoria's brothers and cousins to sleep. Let's look at the bed directly in the center of the photograph. You see that? It's a little bit lower than the 2 wooden chairs. And if you look closely, you can see it's made of 3 rectangle wooden crates. You might be able to notice it looks like there's little holes near the bottom. Those are handles for lifting those crates. Now remember that photograph of the street where we saw the people selling things on the carts with wheels? Those carts are called push carts, and the push cart vendors, the people who sold things, they would use these crates for moving the goods they were selling, maybe oranges, let's say. And each person selling things had lots of these crates, and at the end of a busy day, there were many extra crates left over. These crates were perfect for all sorts of purposes. Saul Confino, Victoria's little brother, might have picked up 3 of these crates from a business owner out on the sidewalk and taken them home and lined them up to reuse them as his bed. What else could you make from a crate like this? So I just see a question coming in, and we're wondering, what is the object on the bed? So we might see on the bed there's what looks kind of like a rug, and it is yellow, it's bright yellow, and it's sort of fuzzy or furry. Now, this object, I'm really glad that you asked this question. It is one that would be so important to Victoria and probably to many members of her family. This object is called a manta, and manta means blanket in Ladino, or in Spanish. If you speak Spanish, you might recognize that word. And Victoria's manta would have been brought by Victoria, packed in her suitcase, and brought with her from Castoria to New York City. And it would be very, very special to her because it probably reminded her of home. Now, the manta is also special because it's sort of reusing something and making it something new. And the manta would be made out of goat hair. In Castoria, Victoria and her family would keep goats. And the goats, if you let their hair grow, it gets very shaggy. And you can cut their hair and make it into a blanket like this one. It doesn't hurt the goat. And the manta might have been a special tradition in the Confino family. Now, this manta might bring Victoria some comfort when she's feeling lonely or homesick. She comes to New York City. She immigrates here when she's just 11 years old. So the manta would be a symbol of her home and of things that she might miss in Castoria. And in some ways, the manta is also a symbol of creative reuse, which is what we're talking about today. Now, what is creative reuse? So creative reuse is when you find materials that other people might throw away and you make something new from them. So you might see things all the time around you and think, that looks like it could be good for another purpose. So this is creative reuse, when you take something that might be considered trash and give it a new life, a new purpose. And this is good for the planet because that way we don't throw as many things away. And it's fun to use our creativity to make something. It's like a puzzle where you decide to figure out what the pieces are yourself and what those pieces should make. So let's look at a couple of examples of creative reuse from 100 years ago. And these things we're about to see would have been very common in Victoria Confino's time in 1916. So our first example is a scooter. And we see two photographs here. On the right is a homemade scooter. So this homemade scooter, the one on the right is crafted from a few pieces of wood, and it looks like it's next to a bed. So we can imagine maybe it fits right underneath that bed. And when you're ready to use it, you would take it out of your apartment, down the hallway, and out onto the streets of New York City. And the photograph on the left shows two kids using a homemade scooter. One kid is pushing the scooter and one kid is riding in the scooter. He's sitting inside an object that looks like one of those crates, the same types of crates that Saul Confino used to make his bed. And the crate is connected to a long piece of wood, and there are 4 wheels attached to the crate so that you can move it along. And we can imagine them trying to move through those crowded streets of the Lower East Side. So that question we asked earlier of what else could you do with one of these crates is right here in this scooter. Now, kids also made toys and games to play with their friends. So here are 2 more photos, and the photograph on the right is a photo of some homemade, creatively reused marbles. So maybe you've played with marbles. And in the photograph on the left, we see some kids in New York playing marbles. There are 5 children gathered around what looks like a small circle that they've drawn on the ground. And we see a couple of them kneeling down and one with his arm extended, like he's trying to get the marble into that drawn circle. And it looks like they might be on a rooftop. We see some laundry hanging behind them, and we see the tops of buildings in the distance. So marbles could be made from lots of different materials. Anything round could make a marble, and maybe they even had some clay that they could use to shape some marbles themselves. What else could you use as game pieces? Now, another really common object to use as a game piece in 1916 were the bottle tops from soda bottles. So in 1916, Coca-Cola was already a really popular drink, and this was before cans were very common. So Coca-Cola would come in a glass bottle with a little metal top. And when you pop the top off and finished your soda, you would have the top left over. And these tops would make the perfect object to use as pieces in your game board or for another game that you could invent. So we see marbles and bottle tops are two game pieces that kids would find or use from materials around them. And I want to show you one more example of a game that was very, very common and that used some found materials to play. So here on the left is a photograph of a group of kids playing stickball. Stickball was an incredibly popular game when the Confinos lived at 97 Orchard Street. It was very similar to the game we know as baseball. Kids would play outside, and they would use the doors and the curbs of buildings as bases. So in this photograph, we see one kid, he looks like he's pitching, and another's up to bat. And there's probably about 12 kids watching. Some of them are standing up on what looks like a push cart. It's got some big wheels, and the kids are standing up on that to get a better view. Now, stickball needed a bat and, of course, a ball. And not everyone had enough money to buy a baseball bat or a ball from the store. So, what would kids do? They would make them. Now, the material that they would use to make the bats is something I want us to think about. On the right hand, you see a photograph of a homemade stick for stickball and a homemade ball. So, what do you think they would use to make those? What material would they use to make the bat? And what material does it look like they used to make the ball? Feel free to add your answers to the chat. We'd love to hear from you. So some questions I like to ask when I'm thinking about what something is made of is what material does it look like it is? Does it look like metal or plastic or another type of material? And what would it feel like? Is it smooth? Is it rough? Is it soft? Is it bumpy? These are all questions that we can ask ourselves when looking at a photograph to try to figure out what an object is and what it is made out of. So you probably have by now figured out that that bat, it looks like it's made of wood, just like baseball bats today. So if you were to look around an apartment in 1916, find an object that could be turned into a bat. Oh, I see, and we just have an answer come in. A broom. A broom is a great answer. I can imagine you find your mom's broom, she's not using it anymore, maybe the head has been too worn out, and you find a way to remove the handle of the broom, and then you've got your bat all set up to play stickball out in the sidewalk. Now, for the ball, maybe you remember that laundry line that we saw in the Confino's apartment? I bet if you took that laundry line and you rolled it up into a big, big ball, you would have something that would be pretty hard and would be just about right for hitting with that bat. But I see that someone named Daxa Mutter said that you could also use a leg of a table. And that is so creative, right? You imagine people all the time, they're getting rid of furniture that they don't want anymore, or maybe it's too old. And maybe you find a table just out on the sidewalk and you decide to find a way to take off one of those legs and use it as your stickball bat. So you see brooms, legs of a table. There's all sorts of things that kids would be able to use in these games that they're creating and playing with each other out in the street. Now, it's so good to hear from you all. Please feel free to continue to add your comments and ideas and any questions if you have them. And I think we're ready to get into our activity where it's your turn to make something. So we're going to get inspired by what we just saw from 1916 from the Confino family, and we're going to use what we have around us to make something new. So do you have your materials with you? If not, take a few minutes to look around the room you're in. Look for something you can use. Really, lots of things will work to make something new. Plastic bottle tops, rubber bands, paper clips, toilet paper tubes, which we might have a lot of right now, fabric, if you have any extra fabric lying around, egg cartons, all of these things are perfect for reusing. You might want to also gather some tape to attach things, some markers or other things to color if you wanted to add detail, and some scissors if you have them. So what we're going to do now is take some time to use the materials you have around you and begin constructing something. So I like to just start by looking at what I have and begin putting things together, using scissors to maybe take things apart or make pieces, using tape to connect things together, using your markers to add decoration or color, and you can continue working on your creation for as long as you need. We're going to take about 10 minutes right now to work on our pieces, and then we'll come back together and see what we've created and hear some of your questions. Now, before we really dive in, take a look at the photographs. We see some examples that were made by other kids in the past. So we have what looks like a purse made from some fabric and some plastic packaging. We have a doll made from maybe a toilet paper tube and some scraps of paper. And also we have what looks like an airplane made with two pieces of plastic packaging taped together. Now, we are going to spend about 10 minutes to create your piece. Remember, you can continue working for as long as you need after that. And, you know, if you don't know what to make, that's totally fine. Just try placing things together to begin. Maybe you end up with a game or a toy or something else entirely. So let's work and then we'll come back together in a few minutes. So I hope you found some creativity in working. Let's take about 5 more minutes to work on your creations and then we'll come back together. All right, so let's take 1 more minute and then we will come back together. And remember, you don't have to be finished with your piece, your creation. You can always pick it back up when this is over. So just take 1 more minute and come to a good stopping place. All right, so let's come back together. And I hope you found some good materials around you and have been working on putting together something interesting. And now, the process we just went through is one that people have done throughout time, right? Be creative, use the things around them to make something new. And this is something you could really continue in your home. Now, let's look at a couple more examples of ways that you could keep this going. So, keep this going by finding new materials to reuse. There's always things around us in our everyday lives that can be given new life and find a new purpose by being creatively reused. You can also make a bigger project. Today we just worked for a few minutes, but you might want to take on something a little bit more complicated. We see two photographs here, one of a handmade doll that looks like it might be made out of some old dress fabric. And it has a skirt and a dress with long sleeves. Looks like could be a really good project if there's some extra fabric lying around your home. And the other photograph is of what's called a rag rug. And a rag rug, it is not really made from rags, although it's all open to interpretation. Often it's just made out of old clothes or material that maybe isn't in good enough condition to wear anymore. So let's say you have a lot of old t-shirts and you don't know what to do with them. You could cut them up into long strips and then you braid those together. And through that process, you can eventually weave a rug like the one that you see in this photo. So we hope you made something creative and exciting, and we'd actually love to see what you've made. So please, if you'd like, you can share with us what you made by posting it on Instagram or Facebook and tagging the Tenement Museum. We might even share an example of what you made in a video on our social media and share your creativity with all of our museum audience. So we have some time for questions. And I'd love to hear if anyone has any questions about the family, the Confinos, or the apartment we saw, or any of the creative reuse examples that were shared from 1916. So I would love to hear if anyone has any questions. Okay, so I see we have a question coming in about what Victoria would do if she was stuck inside, right? All the examples we looked at were kids playing outside, but just like today, when we aren't spending a lot of time outdoors, there would have been rainy days or days when Victoria would just have to stay inside her apartment with her siblings. And something really common to play was checkers, or another game called Skelly. So you can look up and research Skelly and how to play it, because I'm actually not that familiar. But checkers, you might know, it has red and white squares on a big square board, and then you need pieces to play. So Victoria, she actually might have made her own checkerboard by finding a spare piece of wood, getting some paint and painting the squares herself, and then maybe using those bottle tops from the Coca-Cola bottles to use as pieces. So Victoria might play a game like checkers that's easier to play inside than something like stickball. I'm sure she did not play that in the apartment. And another thing that Victoria might do when she's inside is read. We know Victoria loved to read and she loved telling stories and hearing stories. So she might have picked up a book and just curled up in one of those chairs with her manta and spent some time reading, which maybe some of you are doing right now as well. So I see another question about were the buildings actually gray back then? So that's a great question. And it's an interesting one because when we look at photos from 1916, often they are black and white photographs. So everything in the photo looks gray. But really, the buildings on the Lower East Side, they're all different colors. 97 Orchard Street, it is built with reddish bricks. So 97 Orchard Street is a building that's actually red when you look at it in a color photograph. So some of the buildings might be cream colored or a light white. Some of them might actually be gray throughout the neighborhood. It really just depends on the type of brick or stone or material that the building is constructed with. So, really good question. And that's always helpful to think about with a black and white photograph is what did the buildings actually look like and what color were they in real life? So I see another question. What were famous toys that they might want to make or copy, and if they didn't have enough money to buy them? So that's also a really good question. Were toys back then expensive? So the Confino family, we know a couple of things about how much items might have cost, but just as an example, a book might have cost you $2. A checkerboard in a store might have cost you about the same amount. So the Confino family, they're probably paying, what do we think, about $12 to $15 in rent every month. So something like a checkerboard might be a little bit too expensive for them to buy from a store. So that's something that they would definitely want to try and make at home if they could. And the other important thing to remember is that, there were toys available in stores, things that were pre-made, but there probably weren't as many stores for buying toys as we might see around us now. So we can imagine Victoria and her family, they might make a special trip to a store to buy a toy, but really that would be a very rare occasion and much more common they would be looking to make things. So, does anyone have any other questions before we end our time together?